Covering Huntsville, Hartselle, Guntersville. You're watching WCDX News at 9.
The president has the power to make executive orders, but can a new president reverse those past orders? Our Evan Kozloff verifies.
The Verify team is here for you when it comes to politics. We avoid spin and opinions and just focus on the facts. With Joe Biden projected to have won the 2020 election, we've heard a lot of questions about executive orders. People are asking us to verify. Could a new president reverse executive orders of the past administration? Our sources for this one are the National Constitution Center, the National Archives, this 2014 report from the Congressional Research Service, and Alan B. Morrison, an associate dean at the George Washington University Law School. And the short answer here is yes. Any executive order can be changed or even eliminated. Here's how the Congressional Research Service put it. By their very nature, executive orders lack stability, especially in the face of evolving presidential priorities. Continuing that, the president is free to revoke, modify, or supersede any past executive orders. But Morrison says there's a catch here. He says that when a president issues an executive order, they're often telling an agency what to do. That agency then creates or amends their regulations. So when a new president signs an executive order of their own to rescind that previous order, Morrison says they also need the agency in question to change their regulations. They also need to provide a legal justification for such a change.
So that, for example, if a rule that DHS put into effect was subject to public notice and comment, the Biden administration would have to follow the same procedures in getting rid of that.
So we can verify that yes, a new president can reverse an executive order from a past administration, but they'll need to ask the agencies themselves to change their regulations. With your Verify, this is Evan Kozloff.